Yes, folks, it's Thursday. I'm Fred McMurray. It's 2 p.m. Pacific, which this means this has to be...
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pillars of Franchising. We're here with Jerry today to start us off. Our fearless leader, Kristin, is homesick with COVID, so we want to give her well wishes. And I'm just going to disclaim that I did not give it to her, being 1,000 miles away. But it seems like I should have probably given it to her since I had it 2 weeks ago.
So you got to put up with me today, Elizabeth. I'm sorry, but I'll try and do a reasonable job of filling in for Kristin.
Well, I think you've got some big shoes to fill, but you can do it. I have every confidence.
Well, you and I have a great subject to talk about on Word on the Street today. I am blown away by this.
Well, and I also will not take credit for this, even though it's in my home state. I live in Alabama, as most of you know, and came across an article that we just had to share. So we're going to call this What's in a Name? But Orange Beach, Alabama, is just right along the Gulf Coast and your Gulf Shores, is the mayor is complaining about the name of a franchise location that's coming down there soon called Badass Coffee. And is just horrified that there is a word in there that can be construed as a bad word, I guess.
Well, and it's really crazy. I mean, when you're a franchise system, you want to have a name that reaches out and catches people's attention and bring them in. So something like this is great marketing, right? But then when you break it down, as you mentioned, Elizabeth, the name comes from Hawaii, and it comes from the mules, the donkeys that carried the beans down the mountain, and they're known as asses, so therefore badass coffee, right?
Right.
So the fact that the mayor and the city council member called it heartbreaking. I mean, don't they have bigger things in Orange Beach to worry about than the name of a coffee shop?
One would think, but I do find it amusing. The mayor is specifically saying this cheapens our Orange Beach brand and community, and don't frequent this coffee shop. And as we were talking about before we got on air, this is probably going to backfire because all they're doing is giving them attention and publicity. And I personally hope that people flock to Badass Coffee and buy them up right off the bat. I just think it's unfortunate that a local politician would try to diminish a company before they even open the door. And from our Pillars perspective, helping potential franchisees and new franchisees, she's got to be really heartbroken about having this, even if it does backfire on the mayor, it's still casting her in a negative light before she even opens her doors, and has probably invested a lot of her savings or her resources into this.
You stop and think about this, and you're exactly right. Is somebody that's proud of their community and wants to bring a new business to the community, create a lifestyle for themselves perhaps, and has done a great job of researching it, picking something that's really unique amongst all the plain vanilla coffee shops that are out there. This one stands out. And then to have the leaders of the community she's in, where she's trying to bring business to the community, try and kind of take the rug out from under and steal it away. It's crazy, and you and I both know we need to do what we can to try and get as many people to buy coffee from her. So I'll be singing her praises everywhere I go for the next few weeks.
Absolutely, and the next time I go down to the beach, I will make a point to stop in her shop whenever it's open. The nice thing is the franchisor, they did get a quote from the franchisor that just said, it's a local business owner putting her savings into opening this location. We are the franchise brand, but she is the one investing in the community and bringing jobs and bringing revenue to the community. So everybody needs to keep that in mind. If you're in Alabama, go visit Badass Coffee at Orange Beach. Then send us a note and tell us that you did it. We'll put your name on the air.
And that is the word on the street today, Elizabeth.
That is the word on the street. And before we get to our guest panel, which is going to be a really fun and exciting show, I'm going to remind everyone to call in with questions. We've got some great guests today who are filled with information. So if you have questions for our guests, you can call into 323-580-5755. Up next, let's get our panel on the air. Great. And here they are. So if you guys will all unmute. What we'd like to do, this is going to talk, we're talking today with franchise suppliers and people who are support in the franchise industry. So what I'd like to do is let all of you give a brief intro of who you are and what you do. And then we're just going to dive right in to asking questions and getting some great information out to our audience. So Paul, why don't you tell us who you are first?
Wonderful. And thanks for this opportunity, Elizabeth and Jerry and everyone. Glad to be here with you today. I'm Paul Rocchio with the International Franchise Association. I wash the windows and clean the floor here at IFA. I'm the Vice President of Development and Member Services. So I like to say we're a nonprofit organization. I like to say I'm the for-profit of the nonprofit. I bring in all the money so everybody else at IFA could spend it. But it's all about recruitment and retention in my world over here at IFA.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure they appreciate that they're not the ones having to do that. That's a tough job. Matt, you want to go next?
Absolutely. Echo the same. Thank you for the opportunity and having me. So Matt Goebel, I am CEO and founder of Woven. It's a platform that helps franchisees, multi-unit operators consolidate all their workplace and workforce management under one platform instead of having multiple systems to do so. But I've been in the franchising industry and space for close to 15 years now. I've been on the vendor side for all those 15 years, held some C-level suites on the franchisor side and also multi-unit franchisee as well. So just happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, Justin.
Hi there. Great to be here, guys. My name's Justin Mink. I teach, facilitate, coach leadership teams on how to use a simple set of proven practical tools called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS, to help run a better business, live a better life. Lots of people are familiar with the book Traction. I'm a CFE. I'm also a franchisee. EOS is a franchise system, so it's poetic. I thought the universe was telling me something when I learned that EOS was a franchise. I come from a long background with a couple big digital marketing suppliers, leading the franchise teams there, working with thousands of franchisees, hundreds of franchisors, and ran EOS at a small startup, and it transformed the business, transformed our lives. So thrilled to be here with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. We're very excited to have you. We want to thank Andrea Mundie for setting this panel up. She couldn't be with us today, but did a great job putting you guys together and getting you on here. So as we get started, I think one of the questions that, just for basic knowledge, we have an audience that's filled with a lot of potential franchisees and newer franchisees. So how would you describe the difference between the supplier-franchisor relationship and the supplier-franchisee relationship? And how do you, as suppliers, navigate the different parties within the brand? And if anybody wants to just go first, just jump right in or raise a finger so that we don't talk over each other.
I'll start if you don't mind, Elizabeth. I love this question because we do get to work with both sides, and from my previous lives, first I think a lot of misconception if you're outside the franchise world is that it's a brand, and fill in any brand here. I know we have Jerry, so it's Great Clips, right? Oh, it's Great Clips, right? Consumers look at that as one company, but in reality, a franchisor and a franchisee are running completely different businesses. So when you're a supplier serving franchisors or suppliers serving franchisees or both, you have to understand that they're different businesses. They have different problem sets. They're learning about different things. They have different needs. And so I would say that it's foundational at that point. And as you're a franchisee coming into this, if you're new into franchising, you're definitely going to be on that operation side, right? You got tactical, day-to-day, in the weed stuff. You got hourly employees. You're worried about if your team is going to show up for their shift, if they're going to be on time, and what's leaking, and calling your landlord. You have those kinds of problems, and franchisors are dealing with, I would say, more macro problems. That's how I would just sum that up as, firstly, just acknowledging that these are two different types of businesses operating underneath one brand. And it's got to do with franchising, but not to get down that rabbit hole. But definitely serving different audiences with different problem sets.
I'll add to that and say it is, as a supplier, it is an ideal situation when a supplier team is working with a franchisor that is rolling or deploying a program out or testing a program to support franchisees and truly has the best interests of the franchisees at heart. Because it's really a joy and it's a lot of fun to help devise, craft, build, deploy, and sustain solutions that align those interests and connect those dots in a way that adds values for all stakeholders. And so a lot of times you're kind of, supplier, is in a little bit of a delicate situation as the kind of intermediary between those two parties, but also help to kind of unlock innovation at the franchisee level. Franchisees have ideas within a framework of compliance and brand standards so there's a lot of joy there and a lot of fun in terms of innovating and creating programs that serve the interests of all parties. And a franchisor has their heart in the right place when they're really committed to doing so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If I could add, within IFA, our membership is franchisors, franchisees, and suppliers. It's, what we refer to as the three-legged stool of franchising, and you can't have a balanced stool without three solid legs. And from my perspective, and I work closely with all three verticals within our membership. We have 600 supplier members, 1,200 franchisors, 10,000 plus franchisee members. And, we have many supplier members who just want to play in the franchisee space. We have some that just want to play in the franchisor space, or some that play in both spaces. And it's, it's really unique and interesting, especially the ones that, play in the franchisee space. And without getting into, the whole joint employer issue, but there's so many things that, franchisors may have provided to their franchisees, 10 plus years ago. And because of joint employer now, they're afraid to do anything, or they always have to consult their attorney. And so there's supplier vendor folks out there that are providing certain services that the franchisor is very happy to be able to, have that person and that company and that widget, if you will, to be able to just say, hey, franchisees, this is an excellent company, please utilize them, because it removes them from any kind of, potential joint employer issue, if you will. And I've just been, since that, reared its ugly head about 10 years ago, I've just been seeing that a lot more within our existing supplier membership, or even with potential new supplier members. It's just kind of interesting.
That question is on our list. Jerry, I'll let you go just a second, but I wanted to just expound for those potential franchisees who don't understand what joint employer is. Would you just give a really brief definition of what that conflict is, so that someone coming in as a new person might have a better understanding of what you're talking about?
Sure. And I always like to say I'm a recovering lobbyist, because I am. I just got fed up with it years ago and I fell in love with franchising. So I've been, didn't think I was going to hang my hat here for 23 years, but here I am. So with that said, joint employer, you've got, if I could say concisely, really you've got the unions, and primarily the SEIU, and they're seeing their coffers dwindling. They have a heck of a lot more money than we do, and they're going after the service sector, and primarily the franchise sector, because franchising is so dynamic, and it's a huge cog in the economic engine in the U.S. and globally. And so they're trying to unionize employees of franchisees, and what they're trying to do is, and again, like, nobody understands the franchise model, and we're continually educating legislators, even the general public, even employees of franchise systems, that what franchising is, and that it's 300 different verticals, 300 different businesses that all use the business format franchise model as a means of expansion and growth. And so right now you've got folks out there that are trying to dismantle franchising, and they're trying to say that franchisors are directly connected with their franchisees, and they're responsible for hiring and firing and setting wages and providing benefits for the employees of their franchisees. And we all know in franchising that is not the case at all. The franchisee, focused on badass coffee. I mean, we're doing this Open for Opportunity campaign, and right now we're in Baltimore. We've been in Miami, we've been in Atlanta, we've been in Richmond, and we're educating mayors, local officials, members of Congress on the power of franchising. And I jot it down. We've got to go to Alabama now and do an OFO down there to educate these folks on this is somebody in your backyard. Their kids probably go to school with your kids. They're local and they're providing local jobs. This person has is going to be able to realize the American dream by being their own boss, being an owner operator of a badass coffee. And here the local official, the mayor, is destroying this person's dream, or trying to destroy this person's dream. As we all know, bad PR is good PR, and I hope everybody floods this location, right? But so at the end of the day, franchisors, as we all know, franchising is a relationship business, and when somebody's new and they invest in a franchise, the reason why they do it is because they want to invest in a proven concept. They may not want to create, they're not a true entrepreneur in a sense. They don't want to, create something on their own, but they want to invest in a franchise, again, a proven concept. But again, you're doing that because you're going into business for yourself, but not by yourself. And you've got the support of the franchise system, the franchisor, but also the support of all the franchisees in the system to help you be successful. But at the end of the day now, it's that franchisee, that owner operator, who's responsible for hiring folks, setting wages, providing benefits to those franchisees. And the franchisor has nothing to do with that. And we've got these bad actors out there that are trying to say that franchising is really big business, and these franchisees really aren't owner operators. They're nothing but glorified managers, and we're having to educate folks that that's not the case. These franchisees are actually, they own and operate their own business.
Elizabeth, you didn't know how wound up you were going to get Paul by having him fill that in.
I had a feeling, but I think it's important in terms of public education to understand that.
You cut me off. I tend to ramble a lot, Elizabeth. Cut me off whenever you want, please.
That was a great explanation. I just want to point out with these great panelists, as a multi-unit, multi-brand franchisee, there's a big difference because all of them touched on some great points. Most franchisors give you suggested suppliers. And there are some of them that are suggested and some of them that are mandated. So the ones that are mandated are very specific to the brand. You have to stick with those. The ones that are suggested as a franchisee, you have some flexibility. Maybe you can go some other direction, maybe a local supplier or something like that. But following the suggestions of the franchisor is critical to your success. We have too many problems in franchising where people buy a franchise and then go off the reservation, and when they don't succeed, it's the franchisor's fault instead of their own for going their other direction. But kind of circling with our two of our great panelists and the other one, and something they said, Paul brought up some good points in that there's been a whole new growth of supplier opportunities because of joint employer and some of the other things going on at the governmental level. Because first off, we need people that are organized, Justin, with EOS. That's a great way to help finalize some of the ways that you're handling things so that you stay within reason for what you're supposed to be following. Matt, having platforms that consolidate everything, that's great. And I know from experience, going back to what Paul said, many franchisors are not helping much with human resources or training or any of those benefits, any of those kinds of things anymore, because they're scared to death of joint employer and them being held accountable. So having great suppliers like those that we've got on the show is critical to franchising, and also at some level makes being a franchisee much simpler than it was in the old days. So that's my little 2 cents to kind of wrap this all up. So I'll turn it back to you, Elizabeth.
And building on that, one of the things I wanted to ask you both, all of you about, but particularly Matt and Justin too, is how a supplier can set themselves up to support franchisees in the most effective ways, and what you think a critical factor or two is for a positive relationship between supplier and franchisee.
I want to thank Jerry for stealing my question. You took about 2 minutes longer than I would have taken to ask that question, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think a supplier can, in a lot of cases, especially when a franchisor sort of recommends or suggests or there has an approved supplier list, there's no direct fiduciary relationship between the supplier and the franchisor. But the franchisor has a lot of influence as far as suggesting, approving, providing marketing, co-branding, giving that supplier a platform or a stage. And so I think the supplier can provide an amazing amount of value by understanding the constraints and the guidelines, the guardrails of what brand compliance looks like, while freeing or unlocking the innovation and creativity of the franchisees and understanding where that wiggle room is. So the supplier can say, okay, I have my guidelines. I understand what they are. I know how to protect the brand. Now I can go to each franchisee and within those guardrails, allow them a certain amount of flexibility. And as I start to see, especially if the supplier has transparency into performance at the local level, once you get 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 franchisees on the platform, you start to see the signals through the noise and start to identify the successes and failures. And then the supplier can go back to the franchisor and say, hey, guess what? We see this particular tactic or strategy working. This isn't. We're continuing to sharpen our knives and creating a program that, while staying compliant, still is getting better at serving the interests of your franchisees, creating more royalties, more revenue. So when a supplier can serve both parties that way and really help with innovation while maintaining standards, it's a win-win-win.
Yeah, absolutely.
Matt, you want to Greg, before you go into that, let's get Matt's perspective on that.
I'd echo everything Justin said. I think that when obviously the cross-pollination of best practice ideas, I think a vendor has a very unique role to play within the space. Within the confines of our duties to keep certain things confidential, and of course, all of that being said, there's something about the perspective that a good supplier partner, a true partner, can bring both to franchisees, cross-pollinating best practices amongst franchisees, but also between brands, right? And nothing proprietary, of course, and anything like that. So much is just technology is always evolving. I'm in the technology space, so bringing new innovative technologies that help all and make things more efficient, reduce manager burnout, and those kinds of things are they're just agnostic. They go across. One other thing that I would mention as a specifically speaking, not so much to the franchise or franchisee angle of this, but specifically if you're going to serve franchisees, and when I say serve, I mean in the truest sense of servitude in like you're a partner, you're trying to help them, is you have to embrace and understand that largely speaking, franchisees are like, they're like running around like they're on fire. And so there's a level, and I had this conversation, a variant of it, maybe not as PC, with my team when I'm bringing somebody new on, which is that you have to understand they're in the thick of it, right? Especially a smaller franchisee with 1, 2, few locations, they're getting hit from every side. This is probably a new experience for them. They're overwhelmed and they're just looking for solutions, right? And if you're a truly good partner, you're going to slow down to listen and figure out what that is and figure out how you can provide them a solution, not just here's our playbook, here's what the brand told me to do, this is what it is, and move on, trying to get in and out as quickly as you can, but really truly embracing the fact that I always tell my team, they're on fire and we have water, so figure out how to get that together. And it may not always be in the same way. So anyways, that's one little thing I would add to that is just respecting and understanding the life of a franchisee and what that means and what that is.
One of the things I wanted to bring up, and I think everybody's kind of touched a little bit on that, is whether the supplier or vendor is for the Z or the ZOR, that supplier or vendor needs to be vetted. And what I mean by that is you can have a supplier or a vendor who is not communicative. So if you have an issue, whatever the product is, you can't get a hold of that person, and you can pay a few pennies more on something and have great service. So that's one of the things that, and who does the vetting? If you're an owner like myself, and you're told you have to use a certain supplier, do you know that the supplier's been vetted? You really don't. So that's.
And if I could add, I mean, granted I'm biased, I like to think all IFA members are the cream of the crop, and I like to think our supplier members are obviously the cream of the crop. But I will say that, when a supplier member, when I'm on the phone with a prospective supplier member, and it's obvious to me that they either have a couple of clients already or they have a background in franchising, immediately, I just have a sense of comfort because they understand the business format franchise model. They understand we all know franchising is a relationship business, but if a supplier already understands that and gets it, it just makes it makes things so much easier. And I feel better, about vetting in a sense, it just makes me feel better to be able to, bring them on board as a member and then making them available to all of our members. It just, kind of gives me a sense of relief, I guess. Because as we all know, even, unfortunately there's bad actors. There's always going to be bad actors. That's why you can't have franchising without attorneys. No offense, Laura, but true. I mean, it's just, it is what it is, right?
Absolutely. And to build a little bit on that, Paul, in terms of being a franchisee, as you educate them through the IFA and other educational opportunities, what are some advantages of a franchisee seeing the relationship with their supplier as it is equally important to the relationship with a franchisor?
That is a really good question. I mean, at the end of the day, there are certain things that the franchisee, again, getting back to the whole joint employer thing, that, the franchisee is not always going to get these days from their franchisor. But again, you're by becoming a franchisee, you're going into business for yourself, but not by yourself. So yeah, you're still going to get that support from the franchisor. At the end of the day, it's all about, as long as I've been here, one of the key issues is on the franchisor side, it's all about fran dev. That's the lifeblood of a franchise system. On the franchisee side, what the franchisor wants, it's all about unit level economics and local store marketing. And so, the franchisor, they want that franchisee to be successful. They want people coming into through the front door if it's a brick and mortar, or if it's a service related franchise, they want that franchisee, in the people's homes, whatever. But, so of course that, if there are certain, services that the franchisee is going to be getting from a supplier, they want to be able to work with somebody who understands franchising. And I think either, Matt, you may have said this earlier, or maybe it was you, Justin, that they're also going to be able to provide them, because they could be working with other systems as well. So they're going to be able to provide them with, hey, with these other franchisees I work with, this franchise system does things a little bit differently than you. You might want to learn about this and bring it back to your system. And that's, and that's the main reason why franchisees belong, to IFA, because they get to network with other franchisees from other systems, and they learn from those they all learn from one another. And so again, on the supplier side, it's interesting. A couple of questions came up this week from one of my colleagues who's fairly new on my team, and he was wondering, because a question came up to him, you've got a multi-unit, multi-branded franchisee. Are they supposed to use like a different CRM or a different POS system because, they operate, 3 different, franchise brands from different systems? I'm like, when it comes to a POS, it's my understanding, yes, but when it comes to, an internal CRM system, they can pretty much use what they want to manage their business. But there are certain things that, they have to use whatever the franchisor tells them to use, even if it's, they're operating, 3 different systems, which to me, it just seems like there's got to be a way to kind of streamline that. And I'll defer to some of you that, probably, know more about that than I do. But, leading up to this, today I was thinking, my gosh, I mean, there are so many, issues out there that I'm not even aware of, or that don't come up from, as frequently as they do. Or I, came up, 5 years ago and I've totally forgotten about it. But I just thought that was, I reached out to a couple of folks and they were like, yeah, I mean, I've got to use 3 different POS systems or 4 different POS systems. I'm like, how do you manage that? It just seems crazy to me, because then they're also having to deal with 3 or 4 different vendors, right? And that's got to be a challenge for a franchisee.
Well, and Jerry, to me, this might be a question you may be able to answer or speak to a little bit, because you have more than one brand. You have Great Clips and you have The Joint, and they're completely different businesses. But is that something that you have encountered as a challenge?
Right now, at this point in time, you have no choice but to use whatever the franchisor calls out, because they are unique in many ways. And, in my case, we're dealing with healthcare on one side, so there's some HIPAA things that you have to worry about, some privacy issues. So I don't know, maybe Matt's got some ideas, and she's kind of bringing some things together through technology. But that is for, what do they call us? Mumbas, I think is what they call us, multi-unit, multi-brand or something like that. And for those like me that are adding on multiple brands and continuing to grow, this is a never-ending battle. There are some things you can consolidate, our office supplies and things like that. You can go to one supplier that'll handle all of them. But POS and some of those very critical things, I don't know if you can get around that. Matt, you got any ideas?
I think, I mean, this brings up a really good point. We're having this like generic vendor supplier conversation within franchising, but I think it's important, especially as we get into these conversations, is understanding what is top down versus bottom up in these spaces, right? And so if you back up, look at franchising, it's about the consistency, right? It's about delivering on that brand and guest experience at every location. And not to give anybody here that knows more about franchising than I do probably, but right, in order to accomplish that, right, the brand, the franchisor must dictate certain things. And that predominantly comes into play with the point of sale almost every single time. I actually can't think of a franchise system that I've ever worked with that allowed their franchisees to select their own point of sale. At almost about 100% of the time. Obviously, safely say 100% of the time. I'm sure something exists out there, but that is always going to be dictated because it's a necessity. It's the core piece of the business. And then I also largely see marketing, right? Because that is the brand. I mean, the franchisors, one of their primary purposes is to protect and grow the brand. And so they have to consolidate, they have to mandate, and they have to kind of push down from the top on those things. And so those are the common things I see very often is point of sale marketing tools are what come from top down, right? And so you'll see a lot of vendors and suppliers in the franchising space that play in the marketing and the point of sale game are franchisor heavy, because that's where they need to start and be. And there's a lot of other suppliers and partners that, do things that either one side or the other or go across both. I mean, I know Paul brought up FranDev. I mean, there's like a library of tools out there for FranDev that obviously when we talk to franchisors. But Jerry, to your point, where Rowan plays is definitely on more of the franchisee and multi-unit, multi-brand franchisee space, which is all of your back office stuff. It's all that stuff you sweep under the rug and it's just like required to run the business. We jokingly call it the administrivia. It's all that administrative trivial stuff that you have to do to be in business, right? Like compliance and audit checks and incidents and somebody cut themselves and all this other stuff that comes up in communications and scheduling and that kind of stuff is more of a bottom up, right? Because these are all solving problems and really focusing in on that franchisee, individual location decision, operator type stuff, how they want to run their business, what have their preferences. So I don't know if that answered your question necessarily, but I definitely view, those different segments and areas of franchise, of the suppliers that serve this industry.
I think I have one quick point to what Matt just said. There are, like what Woven provides, I refer to as kind of like a feel good, it's a feel good, you're providing services, at the franchisee level that's going to make their job a lot easier so they can focus on driving revenue and unit level economics. And so it's just it's a win-win for everybody at the end of the day. And the franchisor is going to love that. It's going to make things easier for the franchisee because they don't have to worry about that because they're getting that from you. It's like a one-stop shop, right?
Yeah. Well, and Matt's taking care of all the stuff most of us franchisees. We want to do all the fun stuff, the cool stuff. But we don't want to deal with all that crap at the bottom end of it. So thank you for that, Matt. Justin, I was going to bring something up with you that I think is I'm an ex-sales guy. So I think this is phenomenal. As a EOS person, I'm seeing so many more franchisors using your systems within the corporate side of things, and it makes them very, very easy to suggest it for franchisees to use it within their organizations. In particular, those of us that have quite a few units and stuff like that. So, have you seen that being a really kind of a nice symbiotic relationship between you and corporate and helping get franchisees started?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. EOS has been used by corporate organizations at the franchisor level as an operating model, and in a separate instance by franchisees in their own unique local business. But I'm actually working with a few different franchisors to kind of develop and evolve the model so that franchisors can leverage EOS to support the goals and the growth of their franchisees. Because it's such a blind spot for franchisors who offer and have the best of intentions and offer amazing support along marketing and software and technology and collective buying power and all the good stuff franchisors do. But you have these owner-operator models where first-time business owners just don't have the fundamental knowledge on how to execute, clearly communicate, hold people accountable, align all parties to achieve a compelling, clearly articulated vision that everyone can buy into. So I'm working with a few different brands on how to leverage EOS just like they leverage other forms of support as a means to educate and provide a framework that franchisees can then go use to execute within their business. So great question. It's been a lot of fun because it's totally new, and it's actually, I'm working with EOS corporate. I'm the franchisee. I'm working with EOS worldwide to help create that model.
That's great information. I was just kind of digesting all of that. We are coming up to the end of our time. So what I'd like to do is give each of you an opportunity to let our audience know how to reach you if they're interested in your particular services or have any questions. So Matt, why don't you tell everybody what's the best way to get in touch with you or your company?
You can just reach out on the website. So it's just startwoven.com. WOVEN, just woven like it sounds.com, or reach me at matt.goebel@startwoven.com.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Best way to find me is just LinkedIn. I'm super active on it. Just look up Justin Mink, and you'll find me there. And one of the values of EOS that I hold dear is help first. So if anyone has questions, want EOS materials, tools, without any expectation or sales pitch, I am happy to help people in the franchise industry with anything EOS related. So please don't be shy.
Perfect. Paul.
You can always reach me at franchise.org, IFA's website, or my email address, procchio@franchise.org. Sorry, it's not Smith, but it's PROCCHIO@franchise.org.
Perfect. Well, we want to thank all of you for coming on. I feel like we could have talked so much longer, so we'll definitely have to have you back. I think it's an important conversation, and it's something franchisees need to know more about before they sign on the dotted line. So we appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us today. If you have any questions for any of these guys, you can also look on our website. We'll have all their contact information under their guest profile. So coming up next, we're going to have Jerry and Ray doing a segment with Jerry. Be right back.
Thanks.
franchise owners.
Thanks, everybody.
How's your
Bye,
local
guys.
marketing? Do you feel like you could use some help keeping up with your social media posts and comments and reviews? Do you wonder if you could be doing more to attract local customers? Are you able to identify new move-ins to your local area? At Westvine, we help franchisees like you reach more local customers through digital marketing. With daily monitoring, creative content, and ad placement, and customer data intelligence, we'll get your business in front of the people who want your products or services. We also work with franchisors who need an agency to handle the digital marketing for all of their locations. If you're ready to reach more local customers, give us a call at 805-265-5440 or visit us at westvine.com. That's 805-265-5440 or westvine.com.
Hey, Ray. Hey, Ray.
Hey, Jerry. So the question of the day is, why haven't you bought that franchise? And I can think of a bunch of F words besides the word franchise. Okay? And that's fear of family, fear of friends, fear of not having the funds. What do you think, Jerry?
Oh man, those are all great ones, Ray. I'm gonna touch on those and a couple others, and then you filter back in because, our fearless leader, Fred, he always asks, "Is this a good time to become a franchisee?" And the answer is pretty much always yes, right? Because there's so many cool things going on in franchising, and I'll tell my story in a little bit. Some of you haven't heard it before, but I lost a lot of time by waiting too long. So that's what I want to know, because there's lots of great things going on in franchising right now, and many potential franchisees don't follow it enough to really understand what's available. So one of the things you brought up, right, was funding. So right now, I can tell you of at least a half a dozen funding sources for franchisees that are begging to lend money to them right now as we speak. I can think of two of them that would probably trade some gooses and some dinners and things like that to get you to sign up to be part of their organization by borrowing money from them to buy your first franchise. So funding should not be an issue, and it's something people need to think about and talk about, and certainly there's a lot of resources out there about funding. So money is one of the first ones. Well, the second one's, Ray, is which franchise, because there's about 6,000 of them out there right now. Which one? Well, again, there's lots of tools that you can use to figure that stuff out, right? Whether it be, one of the things I always think about is you should talk to the franchisors that you're interested in. You should talk to the franchisees that are a part of that. You can talk to us on Pillars. There's all kinds of different things that you can do. One of the ways that I found my brands originally was through the Entrepreneur Top 500 subscription magazine that comes out in January every year, because it ranks some of the best ones that are out there and gives you a lot of ins and outs of why it's a good one or things you should ask about or whatever. So that's a really good resource, and there's lots more out there. Mr. Google is one of the best resources right now, right? So Google some of those franchises, see what you can learn about them. You may be able to find out about success rates, any issues with their branding or the way that they handle their franchisees. Many potential franchisees are worried they won't get enough support to be successful. If you have boiled down your search to 3 or 4 that you are interested in, they're going to connect you with some of their franchisees, and that's a great question to ask them. What kind of support do you get from your franchisor? Do you think you get enough? What would you like to see them give you that you currently don't get? And that'll prepare you as a potential franchisee. And the thing that I would say, and I'm gonna stop for a minute, Ray, because you look like you've got another question or something, and I want to make sure I give you time to talk too.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that you begin to find out as you begin doing your research and begin digging in your fears will subside. Definitely will subside. Once you find out all the resources that you have available, and probably one of the biggest things is funding, and you begin to realize how you can leverage what you have into something much larger. And you need to set aside the things that people will tell you. Because when I went to my family and friends and told them what I was going to do, basically they looked at me straight in the eye and said, "Are you nuts?" And I said, "Well, not yet, but I probably will be." So I don't know. Did you run into any of that?
Absolutely. When you've been running mechanical contracting companies your whole career, and suddenly you get into the hair industry, people question your sanity, right? But the beauty of franchising is you don't necessarily need to know anything about the service or the product, and you can learn the things that you do need to know. You need to be able to operate a good business. So great stuff there, Ray. I really appreciate you bringing that up. And funding is the number one reason most people are scared. So what you brought up about leveraging, you can leverage any retirement income that you put aside. You can leverage, equity in your home. There's all kinds of things you do. The SBA is a great resource for franchise lending through your local lenders. So do not let lending slow down the process, because there are options out there.
Yes.
And one of the last things that comes up is so many people get tied up in that what if thing, right? Well, what if I just got this from a potential franchisee I'm coaching the other day? What if we have a deeper recession? What if this hiring thing continues forever? What if? And I go, well, what if neither of those things happen and you lose 5 years thinking about the fact they might have happened?
That's right.
The fact is, in small business and in particular franchising, because you got such a great group of peers to work with, no matter what happens, everybody's going to be in the same boat. We're all going to be brainstorming to figure out how to be as successful as possible. So buying a franchise is the easiest, simplest, and most effective way to get into business. So don't get caught up in that, dog eat dog world of what if this and what if that. Let it go. Find some resources. Again, Pillars is a great resource. I'm not beating the drum, but my book about franchising, Live It to Own It, is a great resource for potential franchisees. And one of the reasons this is so near and dear to my heart is I found franchising and was really engaged in trying to get into franchising 20 years before I actually did it. So I'm the living, breathing example of somebody who got tied up in what ifs, and that got tied up in life, and suddenly 20 years go by, and you've missed 20 years of growing your brand and the number of units, and looking at the things you could have done for your family and for the families of your employees and stuff in that 20 years. So I want to try and help other people not go through that. So, we are a resource. We want people to reach out to us, and we're here when they want to talk about what brand, how to get into it, and what are the things that they might run into, right, Ray?
Absolutely. And I'm in kind of the same boat. I didn't get involved into this business until I was in my mid-50s, and I'm sorry, because my dad always said, he was an entrepreneur. He says, "You're never going to make any money unless you make it on your own." And when he meant money, he meant more than a salary. But one other point I want to make, and there's nothing, and that is, we're talking about funds. There's nothing wrong with using other people's money, and that's you can get a lot further in business doing that.
Well, Ray, OPM is other people's money in my world, and that is, we build our businesses on OPM because people want to lend money because that's how they make money.
That's right.
Borrowing money in a business is not necessarily as bad as some people perceive it to be, because your interest is a write-off. So once you pay that money back, you can move on. Most places you borrow money, there are no prepayment penalties. So I coach my mentees to borrow as much as they need plus a percentage for cash flow monies, what ifs, all of those kinds of things, because you can become cash starved in a business too easily. So making sure that you got funding resources, making sure that your partner in funding understands the business so that they're ready to dive in a little deeper if you need to, whether it be buying somebody else out, adding another unit, and having to build it out, or even just cash flow money. So those are all critical things. And I would say, for Fred's sake, now is the perfect time to buy your first franchise, and we can help you every step of the way. So with that, I'm going to close out my segment for this week, Ray. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As usual, thank you for joining Pillars of Franchising. We appreciate every single one of you. We want to give a shout out to our sponsors, the Titus Center for Franchising at Palm Beach Atlantic University. You can find them on the college's website. Also, Franchise Show 247, which can be found at franchiseshow247.com. And we couldn't do without our sponsors, and we appreciate their support. Don't forget, we'd love to have call-in guests. Our number to call in is 323-580-5755. That is 323-580-5755. If you have questions for our guests or for any of our Million Dollar Mentors, we welcome you to call in at any time on the show. We will do our very best to answer your calls. Stay tuned. More coming up. Hello, Laura Liz. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about you, Elizabeth?
I'm good. I'm excited about this segment on the show because I think we had a great conversation with the panel, but now we can get down into some nitty-gritty things about what potential franchisees may or may not be aware of and what they need to know about the vendor, franchisee, franchisor relationship. So what kind of tips do you have for us related to what they need to know and how it works?
Well, I would echo what Jerry said first, just a little bit ago, which is it's really important when you're doing your phone calls. Okay, it's important to do your phone calls to other existing franchisees. Okay, when you're a prospect, but two, one of the questions or topics that you should be addressing is asking them about the technology, about the vendors, all different kinds of things that are really critical to the franchise system, right? In any business, whether it's franchised or not, so many things are provided by third parties, right? We are recording this on the Zoom platform right now. We don't make Zoom. Zoom is an outside technology that we are all able to use, right? But what if, let's say that the franchisor requires you use something else, right? You need to know that. And so it's not that using any kind of vendor or supplier is necessarily bad or that the franchisor should be providing it all themselves. But as a franchisee prospect, you really want to know that the other franchisees who are already living with it, already breathing it, that they are comfortable with it. I know that, when we first were talking about doing this episode and this topic, something that had come up was that recently another one of the Million Dollar Mentors, they are dealing with a new technology coming out in their system right now, and they don't like it. Okay, and once you're in, and you have to stick with it. But assuming it's a designated vendor, required vendor. But you really want to ask, and look at the FDD, right? In item 8 in the FDD, there are disclosures, okay, about what kinds of topics, at least, you're required or you may be required to use their designated or suggested supplier. So there's to look at.
Building on that a little bit for new people, what in terms of a designated supplier or a suggested supplier, are there benefits sometimes to using? I mean, the designated, you don't have a choice, but in suggested ones, do they have benefits? Do they have better rates? Do they have more benefits? What kinds of things often are included with that's going to benefit me as a franchisee?
I tell clients when we talk about item 8, we talk about looking at the vendors, right? Having a good list of vendors is part of why you're buying a franchise. You don't want to go through, right? You don't want to go through the hassle of which POS system is best, right? Which online ordering platform actually is best or has a more competitive rate, right? These are not questions that as a owner of, a single franchise, a new franchisee, or even an owner of usually, maybe 5 or 10 stores that you want to be dealing with. There are economies of scale, right? There are benefits to having somebody else, and negotiate. So it, usually there are indeed benefits. Some of them may be that they can get more competitive pricing, like you were alluding to. Mm-hmm. Right? And some of them may just be that, they've already gone through and done a lot of negotiation. Like something that Ray was talking about earlier on the panel, I think it was Ray, was, that for just a little bit more money, if it's negotiated properly, with some service vendors, they'll provide more support, right? If you need, if whatever it is broken, outside of traditional business hours, or you really want them to fix it outside of traditional business hours, so that way you can be open again, fully functional during traditional business hours, is that covered? Is that in your plan? Right? It's sort of like buying insurance. Are you buying the good insurance? Or are we buying, the crummy insurance, right? That we regret later. When I've worked with franchisors, there's varying approaches. Some of them will go the extra mile. They will. I can remember going 10 rounds with a particular, what was it, like loyalty program provider, and they were willing to negotiate, but it took us a while to get there. But the franchisor was not willing to settle for less, right? They knew that they wanted it to be a certain way, and they wanted certain, what are known as service levels, where you get that, response time.
Another thing that when you think about it is that when a vendor or a supplier is used to working with a franchise brand, they are familiar with their compliance requirements, with their marketing and branding, with the way that business is done. So that is even going to be an educational point for you as a new franchisee, to be able to have someone you can lean on who already knows how to walk the walk and talk the talk, right?
Yeah, we see that a lot, actually. A common example is for the required insurance coverages, right? None of them are usually too burdensome. The point isn't to make you buy super expensive coverage you don't need. The point is to make sure you do have coverage, right? You might have to buy a, $1 million, coverage for, general commercial liability. Okay. And you might have to buy this and this and this and this and this. There's like a list of 10 different coverages, right, that are required because they're frankly what you need as, an established business. It's much simpler for the franchisee to go to whatever the designated or suggested vendor is from the franchisor and say, hi, I need a quote for, ABC franchise, I'm with them. Can you just tell me what it'll be? And they can tell you instantly versus if you take that and you go shop it, not that you can't, but it's just going to be a lot more work, right? I have clients that do it, don't get me wrong, but I don't think they're necessarily even getting a better rate. They're those people who would shop anything, right? They love to haggle.
They always have a guy.
Yeah, they love to haggle. They just, it's like an identity. So it's, it just depends on who you are. But there are definitely,
it's about embracing the idea of franchising, which is not reinventing the wheel. Right? Mm-hmm. Right? It's about the proven concept and following that concept so that all of those things are easier for you and kind of grease the path.
Yeah, and I think I've said it before on here, but the people who are the best entrepreneurs, where they want to come up, they have tons of ideas, they're just bouncing off the walls like crazy. They're usually the worst franchisees because they don't enjoy following a system. They don't enjoy being, in the little box that has, 4 choices for where you get your insurance. They would rather go out. They would rather find their own POS. They would rather build their own technology versus, the franchise model, which is, rinse and repeat, basically.
Right. So when you're doing your due diligence and you're doing your validation calls and you're meeting with an attorney to go over the FDD, would this be an item where you would spend a little bit of time before you dig too deep?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's worth having discussions with because, especially as technology becomes more and more prevalent, right? We had our technology episode recently. Technology costs are increasing. So much now is, every FDD that I see, is like there's a $250 technology fee, and then, and you pay for, this vendor, $100 a month, and this vendor is $50 a month, and this, and you have to understand, right, what all of those little costs are, when you're doing your own cash flow, right? Because if they're going to catch up with you if you don't. And so both for just, do other franchisees like the quality of the vendor, but also understanding, can I afford the number of vendors on an ongoing monthly basis for the return that I want to see?
Yeah. Laura, great information as usual. If anybody has any questions related to the FDD and item 8 and the vendor supplier franchisee franchisor relationship, feel free to reach out to us on pillarsoffranchising.com and we can put you in touch with Laura. Thank you so much for the great information as usual.
Of course. Thank you.
I am Elizabeth Denham, the Chief Content Officer for Pillars of Franchising, and I'm telling you that because I am always looking for people with a great story in the franchising space. If you have a great story that you would like to share either in the magazine or on the show, you can fill out our contact form on pillarsoffranchising.com. Also, while you're there, be sure to subscribe to the magazine. You can choose all of the services that you might be interested in if you're looking to buy a franchise, sell a franchise, become a franchise, if you need mentorship, and if you need to get the word out about your business, we have a lot of variety of sponsorships for you. So be sure to visit our website, like, subscribe, and share this show. And we appreciate every comment and every engagement that you offer. So be sure to visit our website at pillarsoffranchising.com.
We would like to thank you all for joining us today on Pillars of Franchising with guests Paul Rocchio, Justin Mink, and Matt Goebel. Please be sure to like, share, and comment on this episode online. Thank you, as usual, to Jerry Akers, our $1 Million Mentor, Laura Liss, our franchise attorney, Fred McMurray, our producer, Ray Pillar, our trusty host and other $1 Million Mentor. I'm Elizabeth Denham, and together we are your resource for franchising success. This has been Pillars of Franchising, and the dream starts here.